Hello everyone, welcome to the 225 Jury Charge and Literary. I'm going to start off with a selection from Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and this is called Repeat to Yourself, Life Isn't an Emergency. Okay, ready? In some ways, this strategy epitomizes the essential message of this book. Although most people believe otherwise, the truth is life isn't an emergency. I've had hundreds of clients over the years who have all but neglected their families as well as their own dreams because of their propensity to believe that life is an emergency. They justify their neurotic behavior by believing that if they don't work 80 hours a week, they won't get everything done. Sometimes I remind them that when they die, their in-basket won't be empty. A client who is a homemaker and mother of 3 children recently said to me, "I just can't get the house cleaned up the way I liked it before everyone leaves in the morning." She was so upset over her inability to be perfect that her doctor had prescribed her anti-anxiety medicine. She was acting and feeling like there was a gun pointed to her head, and the sniper was demanding that every dish be put away and every towel folded or else. Again, the silent assumption was, this is an emergency. The truth was, no one other than she had created the pressure she was experiencing. I've never met anyone, myself included, who hasn't turned little things into great big emergencies. We take our own goals so seriously that we forget to have fun along the way, and we forget to cut ourselves some slack. We take simple preferences and turn them into conditions for our own happiness, or we beat ourselves up if we can't meet our self-created deadlines. The first step in becoming a more peaceful person is to have the humility to admit that, in most cases, you're creating your own emergencies. Life will usually go on if things don't go according to plan. It's helpful to keep reminding yourself and repeating the sentence, life isn't an emergency. Okay, I'm going to read you some jury charge. Actually, this is closing arguments. Okay, here we go. You made an assumption it was Pooney or Orlando Hunt and Popeye Crandall McKinnon? Yes. Because you had seen them before, is that right? Yes. You had seen them come and drive up in the motel earlier, is that right? And she said yes. And when you saw them, she saw later the 2 silhouettes or shadows running behind you. You assumed that they were 2 men, Pooney and Popeye, who had come up in the car that night, and her answer was yes. That's what she said. But ladies and gentlemen, beyond that, was Gina Lee even in that field? Was Gina Lee even in that field that night when the shot was fired? Remember, she said she was in the field, but remember this. She said she was in the field with Chester Norwood, Hoss Collins, walking west on the path towards Hathaway to get drugs. She said she was with Chester Norwood in the field. Well, Jonetta Hawkins was called to the witness stand, not by us, but by Mr. Davis. And this is why I suggest to you that Jonetta Hawkins does not assist in the prosecution of this case. Jonetta Hawkins said, no, that's not possible. Gina Lee could not have been in the field at the time the shot occurred because she was in the room with me. She was in the room with me at the time. Jonetta Hawkins. When the shot was heard by you, where were you? In the room. In whose room? Gina Lee's room. And who was with you? With Gina. I believe when the shot happened, she went out to look. So does that mean that when the shot occurred, Gina was in the room with you? And her answer was yes. Were there just the 2 of you in the room at the time? And her answer was yes. Was Chester Norwood in the room with you and Gina Lee when the shot was heard? And the answer was no. So you believe when you heard the shot, just Gina and you were in the room together. Is that right? And her answer was yes. Now it's your testimony when the shot was heard, Gina opened the door and either went outside or looked outside at that point. And her answer was yes. When you open the door, you're not looking into the back, into the field, are you? And her answer was no. You have to go all the way around, out and down some apartments and go through the field to get down there. So the shot occurs. Gina opens the door and looks out. And then does she come back into the room? She answered yes. Did the two of you and Gina, leave the motel? She said yes. Is that when you and Gina were trying to get a ride? And she said yes. And now she says something very important. Were the police there already? She said, I believe the police already were there. Somebody was telling us that we couldn't pass that way. What Jonetta Hawkins was telling you was that Gina Lee was with her in the room when the shot occurred, not in the field with Hoss Collins or with Chester Norwood. So if Gina Lee was in the room with Jonetta Hawkins when the shot was or happened, she was not back behind the motel or up on the road, did not see anything, did not see anyone. Jonetta Hawkins was the one that said, sure, Gina Lee had a problem, and Jonetta Hawkins' words were, her problem was worser than mine. She had a bad, bad problem. Everybody knew that. Jonetta Hawkins also said something very important that I want you to ask yourself and remember in the Martin case as well. She told us that people get money any way they can in and around the Desert Eagle Motel. And that is, they do it any way they can. When they're trying to get money for drugs, they will steal, they will trade things, they will buy and sell things, anything to get drugs. And also, Jonetta Hawkins also told us that she never saw Carrie Dawn Scott there at all. So that's what Jonetta Hawkins said about Gina Lee. She couldn't have been in the field. She couldn't have been with Chester Norwood. She couldn't have seen what she said she saw. We brought you to Jesse Brown. Jesse Brown, because he was in room 116, and he said he heard the shot. And here's the key for Jesse Brown. Who was in the room with you, Jesse Brown? And he said Chester Norwood. When the shot occurred, when you heard the shot, are you sure that Chester Norwood was in that room? And he said, yes, I am. If Chester Norwood was in the room with Jesse Brown in room 116 when the shot occurred, he's not in the field. He's not with Gina Lee, and Gina Lee's testimony cannot be believed. And Jesse Brown said there was no doubt in his mind about that. Now remember, Jesse Brown was not cross-examined by Mr. Davis. His testimony goes uncontradicted. He was not even asked one question by Mr. Davis. Okay, I'm going to switch over and give you some tests. Actually, I'm going to read from you from Awaken the Giant Within. All right, here we go. Synergistic relation or relationship of these 5 elements exerts a force that's responsible for prompting you to or stopping you from taking action, causing you to anticipate or worry about the future, making you feel loved or rejected, and dictating your level of success and happiness. It determines why you do what you do and why you don't do some things that you know you need to do. By changing any one of these 5 elements, whether it's a core belief or rule, a value, a preference, a question, or an emotional state, you can immediately produce a powerful and measurable change in your life. More importantly, you'll be fighting the cause instead of the effects. Remember, if you're overeating on a regular basis, the real cause is usually a value problem or a belief problem rather than a problem with food itself. The good news is that we can override the system by making conscious decisions at any moment in our lives. We don't have to allow the programming of our past to control our present and future. I am not discouraged because every wrong attempt discarded is another step forward, said Thomas Edison. There is one final impediment to really utilize the power of decision. That is that we must overcome our fears of making the wrong decisions. Without a doubt, you will make wrong decisions in your life. You're going to screw up. I know I certainly haven't made all the right decisions along the way. Far from it. But I didn't expect to, nor will I always make the right decisions in the future. I have determined that no matter what decisions I make, I'll be flexible, look at the consequences, learn from them, and use those lessons to make better decisions in the future. Remember, success truly is the result of good judgment. Good judgment is the result of experience, and experience is often the result of bad judgment. Those seemingly bad or painful experiences are sometimes the most important. When people succeed, they tend to party. When they fail, they tend to ponder, and they begin to make new distinctions that will enhance the quality of their lives. We must commit to learning from our mistakes rather than beating ourselves up, or we're destined to make the same mistakes again in the future. As important as personal experience is, think how invaluable it is to have a role model as well, someone who's navigated the rapids before you and has a good map for you to follow. You can have a role model for your finances, a model for your relationships, a model for your health, a model for your profession, or a model for any aspect of your life you're learning to master. They can save you years of pain and keep you from going over the falls. There will be times when you're on the road or on the river solo, and you'll have to make some important decisions on your own. The good news is that if you're willing to learn from your experience, then even times you might think were difficult become great because they provide valuable information or key distinctions that you will use to make better decisions in the future. In fact, any extremely successful person you meet will tell you, if they're honest with you, that the reason they're more successful is that they've made more poor decisions than you have. People in my seminars often ask me, how long do you think it will take me to really master this particular skill? And my immediate response is, how long do you want it to take? If you take action 10 times a day and have the proportionate learning experiences, while other people act on a new skill once a month, you'll have 10 months of experience in a day. You will soon master the skill and will, ironically, probably be considered talented and lucky. I became an excellent public speaker because rather than once a week, I booked myself to speak 3 times a day to anyone who would listen. While others in my organization had 48 speaking engagements a year, I would have a similar number within 2 weeks. Within a month, I'd have 2 years of experience, and within a year, I'd have a decade's worth of growth. My associates talked about how lucky I was to have been born with such an innate talent. I tried to tell them what I'm telling you now. Mastery takes as long as you want it to take. By the way, were all of my speeches great? Far from it, but I did make sure that I learned from every experience and that I somehow improved until very soon I could enter a room of any size and be able to reach people from virtually all walks of life. No matter how prepared you are, there's one thing that I can absolutely guarantee. If you're on the river of life, it's likely you're going to hit a few rocks. That's not being negative, that's being accurate. The key is that when you do run aground, instead of beating yourself up for being such a failure, remember that there are no failures in life. There are only results. If you didn't get the results you wanted, learn from this experience so that you have references about how to make better decisions in the future. Okay, we're going to stop there. And going to read some jury charge. The subject here is duress. Okay. Here we go. Ready? Plaintiff brings this action seeking to recover the sum of $50,000 in interest upon a written instrument or promise to pay this sum to plaintiff. This instrument is in evidence. Defendant admits that he made and signed this instrument, and as defense thereto alleges, first, that there was no consideration for the execution of the instrument in question. Second, defendant alleges that the instrument in question was obtained from the defendant by duress, that plaintiff, being armed with a revolver, threatened to shoot and kill the defendant if he did not sign the instrument. Because of such threats and in fear that plaintiff would carry out his threats, defendant was compelled to sign said instrument. The instrument sued upon in this action is a written promise to pay money. It is not a negotiable promissory note and does not carry with it the same presumptions as a negotiable instrument. Such a written promise to pay, if it is found to have been given for a valuable consideration, is valid and enforceable in law unless some valid defense thereto is shown. The first defense set out by the defendant is that there was no consideration for this note or instrument in this instrument. A valuable consideration may be any advantage or benefit to the person making the promise, or any detriment or injury to the other party. A promise by one person to pay money to another cannot be enforced unless such promise is given for some valuable consideration. It is for you to determine from the evidence in the case whether or not any valuable consideration was given to this defendant for this instrument. If you find from the evidence that the instrument was not given for any valuable consideration, then plaintiff cannot recover and your verdict should be in defendant's favor. The second defense set out is that this instrument was obtained under duress. Duress may be defined as the coercion of one person by another by means of bodily restraint, threats of serious injury, pressure, or constraint to such extent as to virtually take away the free agency of the person threatened and compel him to go against his will and destroy his power of refusing to comply with the unlawful demands of another. Duress is a species of fraud in which compulsion in some form is the means employed. A note or contract obtained by duress cannot be enforced in an area or action of this kind. The burden of proof in this case rests upon the defendant on each of these two defenses to prove the same by a preponderance of the evidence, that is, by greater weight of the evidence. Now, if you find from the evidence under the rules given you that this written instrument was given for a valuable consideration and that it was not obtained by duress, then you should find a verdict in favor of the plaintiff for the amount claimed plus interest. On the other hand, if you find from the evidence under the rules given you that there was no consideration given for this instrument, or if you find from the evidence that this instrument was obtained from the defendant by duress, then in either such case you should find a verdict in defendant's favor of no cause of action. Okay. We have a few more minutes and I'm going to read a little bit more from Jerry Brudos, The Fatal Shoe Fetish. Notes from the different doctors that evaluated him. Okay, here we go. When Jerry's older brother was 16, he had assembled a large collection of pin-up pictures that he kept hidden in a box. One day, Jerry found Larry's collection and was looking over them when his mother walked in on him. Again, there was a hysterical scene, and Jerry was severely punished. He never told his mother that the collection was actually Larry's and not his. Jerry Brudos said that around age 16, he began to develop violent fantasies toward females. Brudos began to dig a tunnel in a hillside near the farm on which they lived. It was his fantasy to kidnap and imprison a girl there. Brudos recalls that he had no specific idea of intercourse or rape at that time. He was just excited by the idea of possessing a female. During this period, Brudos began to slip into neighbors' homes and steal shoes. He stole female clothing from clotheslines. He assembled a large collection of female garments, which he secreted from his mother. Years later, when police checked into the manufacturer of the mysterious bra that one of Brudos's victims was found wearing, they discovered that it had not been on the market for years. It is possible that it came from Brudos's teenage era collection. Brudos stated in a psychiatric interview that touching female clothes gave him a weird feeling. In 1955, Jerry Brudos was 17 and had by now learned about sex. He became obsessed with seeing a naked girl, but Jerry was very shy and withdrawn around girls in school and the neighborhood. The situation was worsened by his hulking size and the onset of severe acne. Girls were repelled by the big, clumsy, ugly giant. In August 1955, when the Brudos family was living in Salem, Oregon, Jerry crept into the neighbor's house where an 18-year-old girl lived and stole some clothing. The next day, he went over to her and told her he was working undercover with the police and that he could get her clothing back for her. The story seemed absurd to the girl, but Jerry was convincing. He told her that he lived in the neighborhood where many thefts were taking place and that nobody would suspect a 17-year-old kid as an undercover agent. He told the girl to come to his house when he knew nobody would be home. Since Jerry was a year younger than she was, and he seemed like a chubby clown, the girl felt no fear of him. She decided she had nothing to lose and went to Jerry's house. When she knocked at his door, Brudos called to her from upstairs to come in. When she walked into his room, he jumped out of a closet wearing a mask and wielding a knife. He forced her to take her clothes off and then took photographs of her. After he finished, he ran out of the room. The shaken girl was getting dressed as Jerry came running into the house without the mask. He told the girl that somebody had locked him in the barn and that he had just managed to break out. Did she see anyone? He asked. The girl knew it had been Brudos in the mask and dashed from the house. And as is often the cases in sex crimes, the girl did not report the incident at the time. In the meantime, Brudos developed the photographs and took great pleasure in handling the girl's clothing as he looked at her pictures. His only regret was that he could remember little of the actual crime. He said he was too nervous and too busy taking pictures to actually savor the possession he had of the victim. In April 1956, Brudos struck again. He lured a girl from his school into his car, drove her out to a remote location, and ordered her to take her clothes off. When she refused, he dragged her out of the car and began beating her with his fists, breaking her nose and causing extensive bruising. Fortunately, a couple was driving by in their car and stopped when they saw the scene. Brudos at first attempted to convince them that the girl accidentally fell out of the car and was hysterical because she was scared. Then he told them that he was driving by and saw the girl being attacked by a weirdo and that he had fought him off. The couple took the now docile Brudos and his victim to the police. Police searched Brudos' room and found his photographs and collection of female clothing. The girl in the pictures was contacted and his assault from the previous August surfaced. Brudos was treated as a juvenile offender and sent for psychiatric evaluation at the Oregon State Hospital. The doctors found that Brudos was depressed and that his judgment and insight are questionable, but he was not grossly mentally ill or suffered from hallucinations or delusions or illusions. According to the psychiatrist, Brudos showed no evidence of homicidal or suicidal tendencies and was suffering from adjustment reaction of adolescence with sexual deviation and fetishism. Brudos lived at the psychiatric hospital but was allowed to attend high school during the day. Okay, that concludes our literary and jury charge for the 225 class. Have a great day.